Am I a hero?
Am I a hero?
We're here to challenge your definition of a hero.
All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of 10,000 Heroes. Kind of a special treat for you today. This, our guest that Ankur was lucky enough to interview, and I'll just say I'm a little jealous, man, because Lesleigh Tolin's a dear friend, a client, someone we've known for years, and I just admire her, and I enjoy her. I really enjoy her. So your conversation, of course, Lesleigh Tolin is a grief recovery specialist. So the conversation revolves around grief and the culture of grief, and something early in the interview that I felt very convicted by, or maybe caught a little red-handed, and just how we've come to acculturate ourselves to handling grief. And I'm just realizing as I was listening to the episode, a friend of mine's mother died just a couple days ago, and I haven't called him yet. Not because not at least consciously, I'm not avoiding it, but I'm just so busy, right? With just like the 10,000, 12,000, however many thousands of things that are just lined up for me to do. And to clear some space and just say these words that Lesleigh lays out for us so elegantly that there's no words, but I'm here. So my big takeaway, and I know you're really into this, is that there's something our listener can walk away from this interview and just go do. And for me, I feel so convicted just to commit to, right after we finish recording this, to pick up the phone and call my buddy and just connect with him on that level. I don't know if there's anything much more important than to make ourselves available for this type of connection. I love Lesleigh's commitment to that. And also I just think your conversation with her, she's just so lovely, I guess, is the thing. And so it's really wonderful. And it's such a profound topic to approach, these end of life scenarios, and everything that revolves around that. The loss that I've experienced in the last couple of years, a lot of it is just really inane bullshit that you have to deal with, packing up houses and dealing with all these logistical concerns, and the type of grace that Lesleigh offers. I know that she offers in her work to her clients, but that she communicates just kind of through her voice and her manner in this interview, I think adds a lot to that conversation. So I'm very grateful for her to be on this episode today.
Yeah, me too. I think she really did give us so much in that time that, certainly I will go forward and use regularly. And as we get older, we just become more aware and more connected to people dying or just going through other kinds of grief. Now with the pandemic, there's people are grieving so many different things. Some of it's right. Their health, some of it's their rights, some of it's their conflict with their family. There's just so many things to grieve with this pandemic that we can use her tools and be present to people and be there for them, even when we don't know the solution. Where for me, I was a block. If I don't know what to say, then I don't know what to say.
And there's I have other stuff. I'm so busy, all this other important stuff in my life. But this invitation to come back to this thing that's really vitally important. Like you're saying, this is something so common. All of us have something to grieve. All of us have loss or something we're afraid of losing,
Yeah.
Great. Okay. On that somber tone.
Let's get into it. Let's get into some heavy topics with a delightful elf of a presenter.
That's right. Please enjoy this conversation with Lesleigh Tolin.
So, Lesleigh Tolin, thank you so much for joining us today. There's a lot that I want to talk about with you. And as I mentioned before, there's probably a lot that I don't even know I want to talk about with you until I hear it. But one of the ways I know you, we know each other in a few different ways, but one of the ways I know you is as a specialist in grief, a grief therapist. But I also know that you came to that through kind of a long and winding path. So would you tell us a little bit about that journey, starting as early as you think would be fun or interesting.
Yes, I would love to. And first, Ankur, thank you so much for the invitation. It really is my honor to be among the 10,000 heroes on this show. And I want to just make a distinction for any listener who is with us or will be in the future. And that is, although I'm trained as a psychotherapist, I chose when I was first finishing my first state board, I had an epiphany. And in that epiphany, I realized that because I knew I wanted to work across states and internationally as a specialist, and then going back for training as an advanced specialist so that I'm certified by the Grief Recovery Institute out of Oregon to work online across states and internationally. I chose not to become licensed as a psychotherapist in California because I did not want to have that restriction of state only being California, and to have my board say, Lesleigh, you can't work with a person in Crazy Woman, Wyoming, unless you get licensed there. So because, as you know, this is a later in life endeavor for me, about which I am so passionate, I chose, in fact, to work it as an entrepreneur. And I describe myself as a heart-driven entrepreneur. I am a very youthful senior woman who has had an inordinate amount of loss in my own life. And the losses of my parents and my aunts and uncles on either side of my family over time. And in my early years, I was a flight attendant for a decade and lost a dear friend in a fatal accident, another friend in an auto accident. I worked in hospice services for 12 years, both as a social worker and as the manager of volunteer services. I've always just been called to the end of life service and have lost so many in that way, so many patients to death as was expected. But nevertheless, I have always felt a calling for dealing with end of life issues. And when I was led to the grief recovery method 5 years back, the only regret that I've had since is that someone did not take me by the hand and introduce me to this particular method, short-term action and evidence-based, 35 years ago. Because with all those losses, I would have had such an easier journey to my own healing than I did, because this program that I teach now, which is 8 weeks long for each loss. And when someone learns this program of learning how to process pain with compassion and short-term steps, action steps, they can go on with me if they choose to work on other losses that they've had. And sometimes I will have clients who will stay with me for a few months, because what they realize when they come to me with one loss, either current or long ago, is that they have other losses that are still on their heart that are causing them pain. And when I lecture to other therapists or other groups, attorneys or whomever, I always ask an audience, what do you think is the single most off-limits topic of conversation in the United States? And many times the answer to that question will be, oh, I think it's divorce, or it's death, or it's feelings. No, it's grief. Because in our American culture, our sell happy meals culture, we don't know how to talk about grief openly, honestly, and with grace. So we sweep it under the carpet and we don't know what to say. And we don't even know, when our friend has a loss, how to go to him or her and say, Ankur, I'm so sorry for what happened for you. I don't even know the words to say. We don't know how to even say that. So many times my clients will tell me that their friends, when they had a loss, pulled back or ghosted them and disappeared. Not because they didn't love them, because they didn't know what to say.
Yeah, wow. And that really hits me. I do my best to be present for people in all those moments. And I feel like I have a lot of tools at my disposal. And at the same time, when you shared that, I can definitely remember incidents, even in the last couple of years, where I'll get an email, or I'll hear about a friend experiencing a loss that is so sudden, so tragic, so difficult to comprehend, even for me, that I don't know how to respond. So I'll just put it off. I'll just respond in a couple of days. I'll give them a few days, and then it's a few days later, and then, oh, I'm not sure I know what to say, or what would be not imposing, and so I'll put it off for another week or two, and then I'll forget, and I'll never do it, and I'll have been that person that ghosted someone in their time of need. So, because one of my goals with this podcast is to drop a seed of wisdom or inspiration or knowledge that could change everyone's life who's listening to it, would you give us just like a mini teaching right now, in terms of,
Yes.
if that happens to me again,
And I think,
what should I say?
yes, just on what you've just asked, it's so beautiful that your transparency is such a learning moment for anyone who's listening. And I have only support for anyone who's listening who's been in the same position of loving someone and having them have a loss and being at a loss for words. And what, again and again, with my clients, and what they've told me that they would have appreciated at the time of loss, when someone they've cared for has ghosted them, they've said, Lesleigh, I wish that my friend could have just come to me and said that, and said, Mary, I don't know what to say about your mom's loss. I just want you to know that I'm here for you, and anything I can do for you, please ask me. And if you feel like it, what was your mama like? What was she like? Tell me about her. Instead of saying the traditional, my thoughts and prayers are with you, that person might be at a place where they're willing to talk about their lost loved one. They might not, but if they are, having the interest shown that is genuine in who that person was is heart-touching for that person grieving a loss, because you might be the first person to ask that question. What was he or she like? What, tell me more about her. What did she love? What was her life like, if they didn't know? And if they did know, and they're a friend to a family of someone who passed, to just say that and use that person's name. I'm so sorry your mom, Doris, passed, Mary. What can I do for you? Is there anything? And if there isn't now, just know I am here. I am here for you when you need me. Please don't hesitate to call. And is it okay with you if I follow up and call you in a few weeks, to see how you're doing? And that person might say yes, or they might say, you know what, I just need my space right now, and I'll be in touch. Whatever, and follow their lead. But to just express the willingness to say, I don't know, is heart-touching for that person. And that is what I've heard from my clients again and again and again. And Ankur, my example of that in my own life is poignant. My late mama, Carol, when I was a little girl, any grace I have today as a woman, I feel I owe to my dance teacher, who was 4'11" with a 6 foot tall spirit. She was a Russian Jewish woman whose name was Fanya Sage. I can still see her little face, beautiful face, and hear her saying, Lesleigh, when you cross the room, pretend like there's a string from the center of your head to the ceiling, and walk tall and move your shoulders back. And I adored her. From the time I was 8 till I was 15, I took modern dance classes. When she passed, I was 18. My mama did not tell me of her passing until I was 20. And I was furious. What? Fanya died 2 years ago and you didn't tell me, Mom? What were you thinking? I could have gone to her husband, this wonderful sculptor, and thrown my arms around him and said, Max, what can I do? Anything. I'll be there for you. Somehow my spirit, God, whomever gave me that gift of just knowing what to say when someone's going through pain, and I would have been there for him. And she said, baby, I didn't know what to say. And I loved her even more in that moment, just for being transparent and telling me the truth. And that's so a real story for so many people about loss, because we are not trained about what to say.
Wow. Okay, I'm going to just slow some of that down because there's a lot that you shared. So the thing
Please.
I heard the most was it's okay, and it's even oftentimes the right thing to do to go to someone and say, I heard about your loss and I don't know what to say,
Yes.
but I
Yeah.
want you to know that I'm here, and maybe I don't even know what to do, but I'm willing to do it.
Yes. Yes.
And maybe if there's something I can do now or in the future, please let me know. Can I check in with you in a
Yeah.
couple weeks?
Yes.
And then the other thing you suggested, which it shocked me a little bit. So I want to check in with this. I'm not an expert like you. I'm a little naive, but to ask about what was your mother like, or what was your son like, or what was your brother like, it's that strikes me as so raw, or almost so like triggering. Is there a time where it's better to
Yes.
ask that, or is
Yes.
it?
Yes. That's a beautiful question. And what you can say about that is, supposing you're talking to your friend Emily and you say, hey, Em, you know what? I know it's raw right now. And I know that we haven't talked a lot about your mama. And whenever you feel like it, if and when you feel like it, I would so love to hear more about her
Hmm.
and your relationship with her. I'm just so here for you and want to be here for you.
So
However, in your own words, you say that,
so
because
that
it
gives
shows your
Emily,
willingness.
yeah, it gives her the opportunity to say something right now,
Yes
or to
or
say,
not.
oh yeah, I'd love to later, or
Yes.
yeah, okay.
Or Ankur, I'm too in pain to talk about her right now. And that might be so. It might be so. And, um, Ankur, this just came up for me, and I've shared it with Matt and in my mastery course. And I wonder if it might be good for anyone listening, wow, who is a married person or a person involved romantically with a widow or a widower,
Hmm.
and making a life or a relationship happen with someone who's lost a mate and has adult children, not tiny children, it's a whole different issue, but adult children who are still in that process of grieving the loss of their mom or dad.
Yeah,
So,
that's a powerful situation you're calling to mind. There's like a present relationship, but there's
yes,
also the memory of this past relationship and these children, this parent who's deceased, and this other
yeah,
person, even if they're adults, in somewhat of a pseudo parental role, or the partner of your parent. That's
yes.
the context.
And thank you for making that clear for anyone who's listening. And the reason why I want to tell this story is it's personal, and that is, and it has a lovely celebratory ending to the story that has taken a journey of 13 years. And so I am married now in a good relationship with my husband, George, who has one precious daughter, Ashley, from his late wife, Terry. And the odd coincidence that spirit or God or whomever makes the universe happen happened is that his late wife and I share the same birthday. What is the probability that this would happen for a new romance given the relationship this adult child had with her beloved late mother?
Mm.
So, as you might imagine, his daughter lost her mom when she was only 20, and she was still an undergrad. And when she would return home to Los Angeles from across country, she would want to go with daddy to the cemetery. And we had plans to go to dinner to celebrate my birthday. And of course, those plans would be delayed because he's a great dad. And I celebrated his relationship with his daughter, always did, always will, and supported him to be with her. And every year it became a question of, it's my birthday, it's also honoring his loss and his daughter's loss. So it was finding my way around words and verbalizing who needs what in this tentative situation. And I would say, as the years went on, if you need to be with your daughter on this day, I understand, we can celebrate later. And so through the years, I've shared this in my mastery course with my group because this is so wonderful how this happened. I slowly began to be able to let go of wondering, is this adult child ever going to want to befriend Lesleigh? Because she was in her grieving process. And that was important to support, not for the approval of her, but just to let her be and come to me when she was ready to befriend me, if ever. And so in this past year, I turned 75. And for my birthday, before I tell you this story, Ankur, in the years leading up to 75, say the last 5 years, I would be reluctant to want to step forward in family photos because I felt like she didn't yet want me to be there. I felt intuitively that edge still, and I wanted to honor it. It wasn't about anything wrong with me. It was about her healing process. This year, in my birthday card from her, she wrote, Lesleigh, I was sad when I was writing this birthday card not to see that I didn't have any photos of you and Daddy and Harry, her husband, and me and our 2 little kids. And this birthday card is a offer of a coupon for you and all of us to go together to the beach to take family photos. I just cried when I read this at my birthday party. And the party, by the way, was the first outdoor event in a garden that we could have after COVID began to lift and opened up in California. And so the ultimate sharing is 3 weekends ago, we went to the beach and had this day straight out of heaven for me in my heart, where with her precious little girl who just turned 5 and her darling little boy who's going to be 2 in a few months, and her husband, Harry, who's been a dear friend to me, and she and her dad, my darling husband, and I took family photos together for the first time. And why I share this miracle is to say to anyone who is dating a widow or widower, and there's adult children in the mix, sometimes that journey of family acceptance takes a long time. And what I did during those years when I felt tentative was I sought help away from asking my husband to be a strength for me, because asking for his help felt like I was putting a wedge between what I wanted to have happen and his relationship with his daughter, which is beautiful. So I would go to my counselor, or I would go to my spiritual person, or I would lean on close friends who had a certain similar walk, and they would understand. And this year, for this party, I asked my husband to ask her, are you really okay with being with Lesleigh on this day? Because the 23rd was the day. And she said, Daddy, what am I going to do? It's 13 years later. Am I going to be home and light a cake for Mommy? No, I would love to be there and honor her. When he told me that, I was in tears. And then this birthday card, and then the party at the beach ensued. So all this is just to say, never give up hope of a miracle happening, and just keep one side of the street clean, because in the early years, Ankur, there were many behaviors that were very hurtful from her to me. Not, I believe, intention was there, just grieving and mourning her loss. And I understand looking back. However, it was really a challenge in several years of time. So that's my story.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing, Lesleigh. And it really, so I'm trying to think, there's many beautiful aspects in that, but one thing I want to take away for me and for the listeners is this, it's patience about giving people the space they need and not rushing the process of dealing with grief and loss.
Yes. And the patience is so perfect that you go right to the heart of it, as you always do, Ankur. And that is that patience is part of my fabric emotionally. And I knew that what I needed was to just pull back and let her, in her time of healing, come to me when she was ready. And that is sometimes very difficult to do emotionally when we want something to happen yesterday.
Yeah. So that, speaking of thinking of yesterday and all the time that's passed, Earlier, you mentioned that you can work with grief and loss that has happened a long time ago. And
Yes.
I'm curious about how that, like what that could unlock for people. Like if there's a
Okay.
story you can tell me about someone whose life has been transformed by working with
Yes, I
a
would love
loss that had
to.
been buried for decades or years or something like that.
I would love to. And the story that I want to share with you and our listeners is this. I had the privilege of working with a woman a year or 2 years back who was a psychotherapist and had her own really full and excellent practice for a long time. And then her beloved eldest son died at the age of 27. And I'm not a mom, and I cannot, and in my work, we don't compare losses. However, I must just say, I can't imagine and will not live it, the pain of losing one's child. I can't even fathom the depth of that. And what happened for her, I'll call her Beth, is she got to a place where she knew she couldn't hold space for her clients any longer. She needed to give up her practice to grieve. And she went to some counselors and did some work and found me through my website online. And we talked in consultation. And to make it short, we worked together on the loss of her son. We worked together on the 20-year ago loss of her late mama. And we worked together on the loss of her hopes and dreams and expectations for her other son who lives with bipolar disorder. So she had cumulative losses that we in the grief recovery method as specialists say losses are cumulative when we don't dissect and work with them in a way to process pain, and they're cumulatively negative. So she came to me with a knapsack of boulders emotionally in her backpack of losses. And we began to work first on the most painful, which was her son. And she, after in the 7th week, she said she had a message for me from her husband. I said, "What's that?" And Beth said that he said, "Tell that lady, thank you. I have my wife back because I've seen her smile for the first time in 5 years since our son died." And it choked me up because it was so beautiful for me to witness that personal transformation for her.
Yeah.
And we, to answer clearly your original question, we worked on the loss of her mama from 20 years back, which had been horrific, Ankur. It was in a home fire. And she had such pain, and they had a complex relationship that when we worked in this step-by-step action-based program, which comes with reading from the handbook that we utilize and homework assignments each week, at the end of several weeks, she was in a new place about being able to speak of her mom and have the distant memories, which had been so painful, turn to fond memories instead. And thirdly, is that a word? The third loss of just her relationship with her son who's alive, but losing those hopes and dreams and expectations for what she wanted to share with him that she cannot because he's challenged with his own up, down, sideways moods, bless him. And it aided her in being more accepting of what he's able and has the capacity. Capacity is so important in grieving, the capacity to share with her. And their relationship has improved because she is more able to just be with what is than what she hopes she would have with him and make him wrong for the fact that she cannot have it. The other thing too, when you ask specifically about long ago losses, is when I lecture, I often will ask a group, how many of you have had a loss that is still giving you searing pain in your heart? And that loss was 5 years ago. How many 10 years ago? Hands are still up. How many 15? How many 20? And hands are still up. And I say, if it were so that one of the myths that we teach about loss, just give it time, were realistic, then why is it that 5 years or 20 years later, we still have that horrible, horrible pain in our heart? Because it isn't just time that heals, it's the action steps we take within time that heal our heart from loss. And that's what this method teaches, that is evidence-based. And if I may be proud to say, it's the only evidence-based method in the United States, which is from the College of Public Health at Kent State University, where in the last 5 years, the studies of adults walking through this program showed that at the end of 8 weeks, they had significant changes in their knowledge of, their attitudes about, their beliefs, and it's our beliefs which summon our behaviors, and ultimately their behaviors about grief. So to be able to present this to anyone who is a licensed professional and say that this has an evidence science base is really thrilling because of the work that's been done about it.
Wow. So you're really challenging me, kind of blowing my mind in a few different ways here. And one of the things I had not expected this work with grief could be applied to non-living entities. I'm thinking about, a relative, a human, or perhaps an animal, a pet. But you're working with people grieving like the loss of an idea or like hopes or expectations, either for someone else's life or presumably for their own life. That strikes me as very, very powerful.
Can we stay on that thought for just a moment?
Yeah.
I'm so happy that you brought that up, Ankur. What is so is that John James, our beloved founder of this method, taught all of us specialists that there are more than 40 different types of losses that we can grieve. And yet we think of them as death or divorce or period, the end.
Yeah.
There is one of the definitions of grief from our method is grief is a conflicting mass of emotions that we each feel when any familiar pattern of behavior changes. That means when something is even a happy moment, for instance, getting married. How many of us are married and we're happy with our mate? And we might have had a single life before we married. And sometimes we grieve being in our little apartment on our own.
Of course.
We grieve being I left my little baby condo before I met George that I had on my own. I didn't answer to him. I didn't answer to our 2 Australian shepherds. I only answered to Lesleigh. I didn't have to worry about the refrigerator stocked with food. I could put my extra shoes in the oven because I never used it. I could have my life as that's got to be a laugh for Ankur, the amazing baker. And so I say that learning about what loss really is from this method has been so eye-opening for me as well. Think of the intangible losses that we as a global unit of humanity have walked through in the last year and a half. We've had a loss of life. We've had a loss of safety. We've had a loss of trust and leadership during COVID. We've had children isolated at home. We've had parents lose their jobs and having to have multiple roles of teaching their children, being a spouse, being a mother, father. There are so many multiple losses that we have walked through in the last year and a half that in my teaching from the Grief Recovery Institute, is it a surprise that across the United States, the suicide rate has risen 30% in a year? No, it's not a surprise. It is absolute tragedy, but not a surprise, because people don't know what to do about loss. And one of the things that we do as grievers is we grieve alone. We isolate ourselves and grieve alone. We don't know how to ask for help at times, and we suffer in silence. And grieving alone is one of the 6 myths that I teach in my program, because many of us were taught by militaristic parents who might have said, Ankur, if you want to have those tears in your face, I'm going to give you something to really cry about. So go to your room and close the door and grieve alone and come out when you're happy. I have heard this from so many of my male clients, especially, that that's how they were raised. It's so sad to hear it, but it's a truth in our culture because we don't know how to deal openly and with transparency about loss.
Wow. Once again, I feel like I want to go in like five different directions at once, but I'm gonna take an easy thread, and I want to come back to grieving alone versus grieving together. But one
Okay.
of the things you said a couple of minutes ago was about even grieving things that are happy, or there's just this sense of like a conflicted mass of feelings together.
Yes.
Something I want to explore in there. I love ritual, like public ritual. I'm actually a licensed reverend, and I've married maybe
You
like
told me that. That's so beautiful.
I've married like 30 different couples and designed the ceremonies, and I've even done, you know, my version of a baptism or of a funeral and or bachelor party, or even what we call a datchler party, which is like a kind of a parenthood party before having the first baby.
Right.
Because I do think that these moments, they're moments of incredible transition. They're so powerful. And like with the bachelor party, which, in our typical culture is this kind of debaucherous affair.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
that's not how I do them, of course. But the idea is to put a lot of intention to celebration of this world that you had, this Leslie like living on her own, putting her shoes in the oven, and being able to enjoy it, and to, in my way, to grieve it in a certain fashion, to let go and be like, okay, that was amazing. Now I'm making a decision that that's going to be over, and it's not because it was bad. It's just because I'm choosing to do something else, and hopefully better. But there's this sense that acknowledging the fact that even when we grow, and I'd say this for our own personal evolution, as we learn, as we become better versions of ourselves, we're leaving behind other versions of ourselves. We're killing other versions of ourselves. It's a growing, it's a death at the same time. And so it's nice to have that. For me, it's nice to have that ritual for people. How can we tell me a little bit more about how can we do that as a society better? What is the role of ritual in this? Like what could we have as a
So
society to do that better?
I so appreciate your questions and your thoughtfulness in asking them. So, an example of exactly that is was taught to me by one of my senior trainers, and it sounds like this: For you're a father of a young child, so when a family moves from Los Angeles to New York because daddy got an incredibly better job and has the money now to have a fantastic new house, and we can leave the apartment in Los Angeles and move across, and the kids are leaving their friends, leaving their familiar surroundings, leaving everything they loved and have known for all their young lives. What is that like for them when daddy says, hey, we're going to have more, we're going to have a bigger house, we're going to go to better schools, we're going to go into, and what about my friends, dad? Oh, I'm going to bring you back so that you can visit them. And when I'm asking a group if this ever happened and how many ever were able to come back to see their friends, maybe 2 of 20 hands that went up about the move are
Mm.
raised as it never happened. So one of the things to process with young children in making that move, because sometimes it's going to happen, is to take a child through the house or the apartment in which those wonderful memories were experienced and go room to room, holding hands, and say goodbye to each room and talk about the memories that were lived in each of those rooms together and reminisce and say farewell, one room at a time, one room at a time. The backyard to birthdays, celebrations, Hanukkah, Christmas, whatever was celebrated in the house, and say goodbye to those memories as a family. And when there are experiences of that having happened, the stories that are told about the lessening of grief are huge because there was a process in place of being able to say farewell before that change occurred. And that's an example of how it might be, how the grief might be deterred, if you will. Will there still be grief? Of course, but it's handled in a different way.
Yeah, and I see the similarity to what you were saying earlier about the remarrying with the adult children that we talked about before. It's all about, in my understanding or hearing of it, creating space for the emotion, whatever the
Yes.
emotion is, and not trying to
Yes.
force it on a certain timeline. Like,
Yes.
and maybe not being afraid, like this idea of going through the house or this tour of the land. I mean, my mom just sold our childhood home, and it was kind of a similar situation where I wanted the time to be able to walk around there and say goodbye and see what came up. And maybe it would be nothing, and maybe it'd be something totally arresting, but just to give it that space.
Did you have it? Did you make it
Oh
happen?
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
definitely.
beautiful. Oh, that's beautiful, Ankur. That's beautiful. You know, well, first let's answer the other things that came up for you. And then I want to talk with you for a few minutes about some of the other myths of grieving, because I think that those would be a great learning discussion for our listeners.
Beautiful, beautiful. Let's say something unexpected happens, like this thing of a family member dies in a car accident.
Okay.
My default impression would be like, that was a horrible accident. And even 10 years later, even after I hopefully address the grief in one way or in various ways, I'll still look back on that, and my narrative will be, that was a horrible thing. It never should have happened, but I dealt with it. There's another perspective that would come in and say, oh, everything happens for a reason. You just got to figure out what the reason was. Um, and that's a way of like taking everything that's happened to us, whether we break a cup of coffee or are fired from a job or accidentally twist our ankle or suffer this grief, and try and kind of milk or maximize the learning potential from that moment. Does that make sense to try to do that with some sort of horrible tragedy? To be able to look back at it 10 years later and not say, oh, that was a horrible thing, but I dealt with it, but get to a point where you're saying, oh, I'm so glad that that happened, or there's a perfection in that moment that I couldn't see then, but I can see now.
I'm not quite sure of the issue of perfection of a tragedy happening. I am sure of when you say, and you've said this twice, and I so appreciate it, that if something tragic occurred, say with a family member's loss, and 10 years later, I'm able to look at it and think that what comes up for me is I would hope that if some loss like that occurred for you, that what would happen for your heart's healing is that you would take steps for healing your heart about that loss sooner than a decade later. That's the part that resonated with me. And many times comes up when I'm consulting with someone and they say, you know, my favorite uncle just died a month ago. Is it too soon for me to walk through this program? And I'm just thorough and honest in describing it and saying, this is a step-by-step action and compassionate program. So taking care of your heart when something unexpected, like the horror of losing a family member too soon happens, having that healing process happen sooner than later is always my hope for anyone, because I know what the results of this kind of a program can offer. And on that note, I'm not so sure that I know how to respond with an open heart about the perfection of how an event that's so sad happened or not. I just am more in my life today accepting of the changes in life that happen, especially because I'm in the age group now where it's happening around me every day. Almost every day I'm hearing of an illness or a death and I can remember being 40 with my mom, 30 years my senior, and saying to one of my older brothers, I don't want to talk to her anymore. If I was 40, she was 70. If I was 45, she's 75, my age now. And I'd say to my brother, Steve, you know what? Every time I talk to her, somebody died. I don't want to hear it anymore. And I think, oh my goodness, is that where I'm at now? And it's humbling. And yet I am. And this is what's happening. And then I know too, when something unfortunate happens, maybe not a death, Ankur, but I know you know that I've had health challenges with my husband. And I know that I had to pull back from my work for some time to just take care of Lesleigh and not hold space because I couldn't do it. And to know when we can be present and when we can't be present, I think is a a true gift of knowing ourselves. I know that the process of accepting life as life happens, whether it's a tragedy that we are not expecting, or it's a loss of someone with a chronic illness whose passing we are expecting, is so the heartbeat of the important part of this process is acceptance of what life offers, whether it's expected or not. And working on that acceptance is sometimes a challenge. In fact, this morning in my mastery group, I posted a quotation by Leonardo da Vinci that I'm going to quote now.
Please.
Some of us see, period. Some of us see when we're shown, and some of us never see, period. And so my point is, in the last part of that, some of us never see, is where I struggle sometimes with acceptance, especially when I want someone to see it in my way. And guess what? One, they don't. Two, they might not have the capacity to ever go there. And three, they may not want to ever go there if they have the capacity. So acceptance is something, I bring this up with this quotation just to say that I, Lesleigh, as a specialist trained in grief and loss, am working on all the time with myself. Period.
Beautiful. So one more question, and then we'll get to those takeaways about the myths. So it's related to this idea of acceptance. Typically, I remember in middle school or high school, I got this narrative that there's this process, like the 4 stages of grief. This is what I remember from 30 years ago, and I haven't looked at it. It starts with denial.
We have to
anger.
talk about that.
Is that true? Is that like still a thing?
Yes. Oh, bless you for bringing that up. This is so important for our listeners to hear. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the late beloved Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, studied and worked with terminally ill patients for many, many decades. She was a friend of the founder of the grief recovery method, John James. What Elizabeth did in her incredible work was for terminally ill patients. So in my hospice work of 12 years, I experienced these stages continually and not necessarily in this order. They are 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I remember the first time in the early 90s that I saw a terminally ill client in her final stage of acceptance. And she had this peaceful repose on her face that I couldn't put into words to tell you what it looked like, because I don't have words. It was so beautiful to witness. And those stages for someone who's been given a terminal diagnosis fit. They didn't necessarily happen in that order. They might not all happen to that person, but they were real for someone experiencing a terminal illness. What the confusion has been through the decades is that for grievers who hear about Elizabeth's beautiful work for terminally ill clients, patients, they mistakenly apply that to themselves when they're grieving.
That's totally what I thought. I thought it's for people who are grieving. That's what they go through.
No.
Well, thank you.
And again, what John James has taught me is that he will say, and he had this incredibly wonderful sense of humor, he'll say, hey, my mama passed away. I didn't have any denial that there was a deceased body in the bedroom. She was gone. So telling me that I'm in denial about my mother's passing really pisses me off, makes me very angry. No, there was no denial. So these stages of grieving, and someone might be very depressed, and many of my clients have been, and they might be finally gaining acceptance about a resentment they had that they let go of through my process. And they might have anger about feeling absolutely abandoned by their mate leaving too soon, understandably. And they might want to bargain with God. If only you could bring Jack back, I promise I'll take out the garbage every other whatever. But there's not a sense of denial ever that someone died. They died. So the confusion between terminally ill and people who are grieving was huge through the decades. And John made it very clear in our teaching that there's a distinction between the two. So I'm really glad that you brought that up.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful. Okay. Now, would you like to give us those?
Yes.
Those
So
minutes.
we talked about some of them already, Ankur, and in the examples of my speaking to, say, a group, when I say, raise your hand if you still have searing pain about someone who's passed and it's 5 to 20 years later, that's cumulative loss that's never been dealt with. And the myth is just give it time and it will pass, is what sometimes people will say to us when we have a loss, which is an intellectual statement about our emotion, which is heartbroken. Grievers are not broken. We are brokenhearted in the moment of losing someone or something. So that's one. And John laughs about it. And he says, if it were action and if it were just time that passed, tell me this. If you have a flat tire and you're on the freeway going from place A to B in a hurry, and you get it flat in the end and you're in the emergency lane, are you going to take out a lawn chair and wait for the air to slowly flow back into your tire? Or are you going to be on AAA's call in 3 seconds going, dude, get over here. I have an emergent situation. That's how he talks about action in time. And action in time in these action steps in our program is the equivalent. Okay, second is being strong for others. Many times in our families of origin, depending on where we are in the queue of kids in the family, we might be told by a mom or dad, dry your tears. You need to be strong for your little brother. Auntie Minnie just died. Get your act together. Stop crying. You have to be strong for your sister. It's so honestly often spoken in so many families, to be strong for another when your heart is broken. And that way, the person who's grieving, her emotions are dismissed. What about these R2? Don't feel bad and replace the loss. Oh my goodness. So here's an example from my childhood. When I was a little girl, from the time I was 2 until I was 6, every night, my precious little Tuffy Cocker Spaniel, black and white, slept by my side. My brothers had their own room. I had my baby girl's room, and my little boy my fur ball slept beside me. We were inseparable. He was killed by a neighbor's car. I was inconsolable. I could not stop crying. My dad was a salesman. He came home a few days later from a trip, saw my tears, and said, baby girl, don't cry. Don't feel bad. Don't cry. Stop those tears. On Saturday, we're going to the pound and we're going to buy you a new dog.
Wow.
We went to the pound, we got home a terrier on Saturday. Do you think I ever bonded with this new precious pet? No, I felt sorry for the pet because I could not relate to it. How many stories with my clients have I heard common to this again and again and again? Take it on a wider plane to our divorce rate. How many times have you been with people who are again with a relationship that's toxic for them because they haven't grieved the prior one and they're unable to be alone and fill the space with another relationship that also is not healthy until they heal about the past one and have an open heart to maybe choose a different dynamic going forward. So I'll laugh with you about my history as a younger woman and cite an example from my past because I'm an open book. In my 20s, 30s even, until I was in my healing process, because I came from an alcoholic background and my father was a miracle and became sober later in life and died 14 years sober at age 91. So miracles can happen. In the early days, our family dynamic was chaotic, filled with temper, abuse, physically from him to my brothers. I witnessed it, secondary trauma. It was not healthy. So I grew up. If you put me in my early 30s in a room of 500 men and you blindfolded me, and 499 of them were young men who wanted a healthy relationship with one beautiful young woman, I would find the one who is alcoholic, a player, and never wanted to be with anyone because of his own stuff.
Wow.
I would find them by radar. Okay. That's our culture, Ankur. We, so many times in our culture, bring someone else into our space who's equally toxic for us as the one before, because we haven't properly grieved the one before. Why is our secondary divorce rate so high? Because this is what happens. People bring in the same relationship because they haven't grieved the last one to marriage that's just as unhealthy as the first one, unless they go to therapy or they go to some kind of a specialist like Lesleigh and they heal. And then they're open to a new dynamic, which is beautiful. So don't feel bad and replace the loss are two of the primary myths in our culture. Don't feel bad and replace the loss are what I see every Monday at my detox center. Replace the loss. Don't know how to replace the loss. I'm going to pick up weed. I'm going to pick up meth. I'm going to pick up coke. I'm going to pick up fill in the blank. I'm going to charge my charge card and go retail shopping to my detriment till I'm 60 grand in debt. Anything to replace that loss with some kind of action that isn't about healing. That's our culture, our fast-paced culture.
And it's a really powerful combination, right? Like each one of
Yes.
those on its own would be itself not that helpful, but together, don't feel bad, replace the loss.
Yes. Yes. And so many times when we are hurting and someone will say to us about our loved one who just passed, because they don't know what to say, like we said an hour ago, they might come to us and say, Ankur, I'm so sorry that your auntie died, but you know what? It's better. She's out of pain. She's in a better place now. What? You just are heartbroken about this loss. That's an intellectual, yes, realistic statement. That's true, yes, but your heart is broken. Is that what you need to hear in that moment? No.
So that's another version of the don't feel bad?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Look at the bright side. Look at the positive.
Exactly.
Don't feel
Another is, how many times do you see some of the people you've met in life who are on a so busy schedule, cannot stop, cannot stop, cannot stop. They have a broken heart about someone or something. And what they do instead of walking through a process to heal from that pain is they're working a 9 to 5 and then they work a 6 to 11. So they keep busy, keep busy, keep busy. Don't feel your feelings. Keep busy, keep busy. And it is a way to manage emotions that isn't healthy. Don't feel bad. Replace the loss. Grieve alone. Just give it time. Be strong for others and keep busy. Those are the 6 myths.
Okay. And so out of all those, we discussed grieve alone a little bit earlier in the show, but not in this last little segment. So the
Can we
idea
talk
there is
about
we
it?
shouldn't share our grief with other people. We should-
Yes, we are grievers or isolators. We are the king and queen of isolation. And the antidote to grieving is participation every time. The antidote to healing our heart is participation. The grief recovery method that I teach one-to-one, because that's my calling, can be offered in a group setting as well. Some people like to be in a group. Some people like the intimacy of dealing with their specialist one-on-one and having that entire hour be just for them. And because that's my way of working, that is what I offer in my program. So the issue of grieving alone that can be so painful is so true for so many grievers. And grieving alone can be, I'm in my room, I'm leaning on my drug of choice, I don't need anybody else, I don't want to talk to anybody else, I'm going to do it my way. And so on that issue, last year, I had a lovely man I dealt with his pain over his daughter's OD. Too young to say goodnight. It was heartbreaking to hear the story, only 32 years young, and in so much pain about life, who couldn't ask for help and took herself out. And dealing with him about his loss was just a tragedy for him, and so difficult to hear that story. And he was in a better place after our work together. However, grieving alone is so very common. And that's why, when I mentioned earlier in the statistics from across country of the data that are given to the Grief Recovery Institute about loss, the suicide rate during COVID has risen 30%. It is so tragic. It is so tragic to hear this again and again about people who have been unable to say, I'm at a loss, I need help, and can't ask for help, and are in so much pain that the only answer to their pain is to say goodnight to life. It's so sad. And that's what has happened. And so the antidote to that grief is participation, whether it's in a group or it's one-on-one. It's asking for help. And asking for help is so difficult because our other myth, one of those 6, is be strong for others. You don't need, get yourself together, Ankur. You can't cry. You have to be strong for your little sister and your little brother. Get it together. I hear that from clients all the time. It's just horrific because parents don't know what to say. Am I criticizing the parent? No, of course not. I'm not a parent. I bow to parents. I think it's the most incredible job on the planet. And early in life, because of my own background, I knew that it was not my calling. So that was a smart move for me. However, the be strong for others is what I hear from my clients so many times that they were trained in as a child from parents who probably were trained by their parents, many of whom were immigrants and never talked about feelings. We're just getting by in life to live day to day. So it's a generational experience of what we are taught about grief and loss that has to be renewed by somewhere in the dance of life where somebody says, I can't do this on my own. I need help. I need to ask someone to help me or point me to someone who can.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. When you responded to the calendar, the scheduling invite for this, you sent a little bit in about your notion of purpose and how that's connected to heroism. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Could you share that with us? And I'd love to just hear that from you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for asking. I am so connected to that purpose now in my daily life in every way. And for me first, I believe that you had asked in the invitation to consider what is a hero to me. And I love that question. And for me, I believe a hero, oh my goodness, is anyone who is living his, her life in a way that has meaning and purpose for him or her individually. And the effects of that purpose are for the greater good in however that manifests. And for me, in the business that I have with grief and loss, and I'll state my purpose in a second, is that if this is a business and I operate it as a business, however, what's so Ankur is if I weren't working as a part-time businesswoman, as a grief specialist, and I were independently wealthy and had won the lottery, I would do this anyway. This is my calling. There, a job I think is a living, and then we who have a calling, who are fortunate enough to be called to whatever is our spoken effort in life, the calling is a joy. And that's what this is for me. So to be a catalyst for change in someone's life who has carried grief, and then to see them leave 8 weeks later with a baby elephant off their chest and heart is unspeakable joy for me. And from that experience, I developed this purpose that I would like to speak to you. I am here. My name is Lesleigh Joan Tolin, and I am here to share, inspire, and witness personal transformation. My purpose is to gift my light one-on-one and to international communities. I continue to evolve spiritually as I connect to the heart of others with caring, compassion, and curiosity.
Oh, Lesleigh, you just thank you, and you just set a new template or a new tone for how I want to end every episode of this podcast. If everyone could be as vulnerable and as inspired as you've been today. So
thank you, Ankur. Oh my goodness. I'm so grateful to my mastery course and my leadership for helping me to have the tools of thinking to develop this clarity of my purpose. So that's what I've chosen to do. And will continue to do. And I expect to be doing this when I'm 90.
Oh, Lesleigh, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation, my friend.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Lesleigh. It's just such a pleasure to have you on today. And yeah, I just want to share with everyone, we can contact us on Twitter at 10,000 Heroes Pod. Check out the show notes, which is 10kh.show on our website. And we'll catch you next time.